Okay, so today we're going to talk about belts. Which belt fits better? Why do some people have preferences for one versus another? A lot of people really don't have a preference. They just want something that they feel tight with. For some other people though, we encounter situations where, say, squatting, deadlifting, maybe even benching sometimes, that people seem to favor one belt over another. Here, I have a bunch of belts to explain maybe why that could be the case. Probably the best way to start would be the fact that there are a few main differences between belts, and that would be thickness and then belt type. So thickness, typically you're going to run into 13 or 10 millimeter variants. Of course, you'll run into your 6 or 7 millimeters at your commercial gyms. But these are not the ones that we're probably going to talk about today. After 13 and 10, there are levers and there are prongs. So to distinctify between the two off the bat, the difference between a 10 and a 13 is simply that it is thicker. But that does not always have a determining factor on, say, for example, how it feels. You can have a 10 millimeter belt, for example, that is thinner than a 13, but if the 13 flexes more, it's gonna feel objectively different than the 10. The 10 is not always going to be just simply looser or simply less in the way. Most 13 millimeter belts are going to simply feel like they have more support because there's simply more of the belt itself. There is another aspect of 13 and just of belts, which is rigidity. So if a belt is rigid in this sense, then when you put it on, it is going to get tighter a bit faster because the material itself is thicker and more rigid. However, there are belts that have less rigidity and they kind of flop. So what happens is when you push into the belt, you kind of get a give in a sense. And you would wonder, why is give a thing? Like, why aren't we just trying to get into the tightest thing possible? In, recent episodes, podcasts, some videos that we've gone over with the deadlift, we've found that gaining and having space in our lifts is important. So belts are not so different because belts are actually what can provide space because you are tensioning a system. If you have too much tension, you're basically going to run out of space sooner. And, of course, we'll go into a little bit about how that works. 10 thinner, 13 thicker. Now, the other main difference is lever and prong. Levers actually, came out maybe, I can't remember, maybe 15, 20 years ago. But before that, prongs were mainly what was used, more because of just the mechanism of it. At the beginning, no matter what, all prongs are going to be and have more give than levers. Prongs will always have more give than levers ever will. The reasoning behind that is because when you put a prong belt on, once you lever it into this mechanism here, there's still a latch here that kind of goes back and forth. So no matter what, no matter this material, no matter anything, this latch is gonna have space in it no matter what. So we're always gonna have more give into it because that latch is always gonna give. As a result, even if you get a really tight, rigid prong, it's still gonna give some. While we're on the topic of prong belts, there's also double prong variants. A lot of people don't know the reasonings behind double prongs and single prongs. A lot of people just favor the single prong because they see their favorite lifter use it. The main difference between a double prong and a single prong is the fact that there are two prongs. So what happens is the rigidity of the bend in this direction actually is stabilized, whereas with a single prong, you're gonna get this ability to bend it this way. I can imagine if I was squatting or deadlifting, you can imagine it kind of caving. If you have something that is flimsy enough, it will actually bend whenever you're using it. So you'll get tight around it, but the material will still bend. With a double prong, it's very unlikely that you're gonna get that bend in that direction. So levers in general were created because of the fact that people wanted tension. They were using prongs for so long, and then someone was like, let me create a latch or something where I can just quickly make it tight. Because many people, for a very long time, you've probably seen them, they'll grab their prong belt, they'll anchor it up against a rack, and they'll lean into it to get as tight as possible. And I guarantee you someone just said, wow, I'm just gonna find a latch for this and I'm just gonna close it up. What happened as a result though was a lot of people started getting into lever belts before really learning how to brace. And bracing is the act of tensioning a system, but if you don't have enough space to tension the system, then you're not actually tensioning anything. You're just hitting a wall. And so that's why lever belts can be valuable, because sometimes you do need kind of a wall to push against if you know how to effectively brace. But if you don't know how to effectively brace, then a prong belt can be useful because it forces you to. You actually have to force to expand into the belt. Also, among levers, there are materials that are simply flimsier than others. Like this is an Inzer Forever lever belt. The Inzer material is extremely rigid. If we're talking about a wall feeling, this is the belt that you would desire if you wanted to physically feel a complete wall. We get to the SBD, of course. The SBD has made a lot of traction because they actually created a belt that is made out of a specific type of leather that actually is a lot more conforming and actually has some flexibility to it, especially when you break it in, there's some flexibility. So this belt has struck a little bit of both worlds in the fact that you can push into it, but then it still has the stopping power of a lever. Some of you are probably wondering why we don't just all pull with levers. Because why not just pull with the SBD? Because of the simple fact that, okay, I get some give, but then I get maximum tension. And it's because when we lift, sometimes tension is not what we need in a certain space. So for example, with a lever, I'm gonna have that tension the whole time. But say I'm squatting, if I don't have enough space, say in my hips, for example, or say in my rib cage, what's gonna happen is if I tighten that lever up too much, I'm gonna get down into the hole, run out of space, and I'm either gonna hurt my back or I'm going to shift forward because I've ran out of space. Of course, you can find space through mobilizing, or if you find out that, wow, this groove isn't working for me, you can simply take a prong belt and achieve a similar situation. Because what happens is in a prong, there's less space. As you go down, it flexes to create that space. That's why prong belts have kind of made their way back into the scene, because originally levers were just what everyone wanted to use. Prong belts started becoming really prevalent because people noticed that they had movement issues. And movement issues are something that belts can actually aid in or ruin, because you're tensioning the midsection, the actual part of you that connects this rib cage and this scapula with this pelvis. So if I have a pelvis that's running one way and I have a rib cage that's running the other way, you can imagine that if I grabbed a lever belt and I tightened it up really good, I'd probably be standing like this when I squat. Say I have this problem, I jump into a prong belt. What's gonna happen is as I go down, because I'm gonna wanna go down straight, even if I'm facing one way, I still wanna go down straight. So I can go down with the prong belt, and it will actually forgive me for what my position is by creating space. So it's allowing me to get more space. I'm trading space for tension. And that's why some people simply lift better in prong belts over levers, because not everybody moves the same and not everybody tightens up the same. So in deadlifting, this belt, this Toro belt, has become very prevalent because of how flimsy it is. Flimsy belts are not a favorite of many, but for someone that maybe needs to get more space before they get into the bar, these belts are pretty popular, because it doesn't get tight right away. You can imagine tensioning the system up and then imagine it got tight too fast before you even got fully into the bar. And that's what would happen with a lot of people who used lever belts who didn't have enough space in their system. They would essentially time their deadlifts, and the deadlift would start to move immediately, and it would automatically, they would just essentially not get fully in groove before the bar left the ground. And that's okay at lightweight, but then you see a bunch of misgrooves at heavyweight. A lot of people would start to use a prong belt on a deadlift as a result. So say you're at home, or say you're at the gym really, and you have a belt already, and you want to know if a different belt would be better for you. What you would do is, of course, talk to your coach before just switching belts. I would definitely do that. On top of that, just start to notice in your lifts if when you start running out of space, because we essentially do want to run out of space because that's where the maximum amount of tension actually occurs. But we want to run out of space. For example, in a squat, I would like to run out of space in the hole. Like as I hit the bottom, I need that tension to come back up. Say I'm running out of space above parallel. I would feel strong, but I'd be in a bad position to come back up. And I would also be going against competition rules, which we usually want to adhere to. If that is what's occurring to you, then the belt can be a solution. Same thing with deadlifts. If you wedge in and the bar seems like it's just coming off the floor a little bit too soon, or you keep rounding your back over something that's extremely rigid instead of actually stabilizing yourself and allowing yourself to stabilize against something, a belt can be a solution. Belts are revealing tools for understanding how to lift in a genuine manner. We talk about stacked all the time. In order to get stacked, we have to know where stacked is. And if you have a belt that is too tight, then it can hide what stacked is. Like I can lever this really, really tight, put myself in an extremely extended position, and this belt's gonna make me feel okay, because I wouldn't know the difference. It's gonna be so tight, I won't know. And where I'll find out is when I run out of space in the hole, or where I'll find out is when I wedge fully in. Find out too late is what I'm saying. But we take those experiences and we say, okay, I'm clearly running out of space with this belt. Maybe I can just switch belts, not have to change a whole lot about my form. And this sort of just does the job for me. If you see that you are losing space in a place where you should have space, then a belt is something to consider that can be preventing you from getting the space that you need. I have many athletes that have just switched belts, not changed anything else, and then all of a sudden everything is so much more efficient, makes sense, clicks, I understand it now type of situation. I recommend all of these. It's all feel. I'm not advocating for one or the other. It's just understanding where each belt belongs on the spectrum in order to say, okay, a lifter looks like they're running out of space here. And then understanding that the belt can be a limiting factor that is preventing that space from occurring.
Did you ever recommend this one?
This one? Yeah. Yes, okay. So believe it or not, I know some people that actually use what's called a tapered belt. They have it thin in the front and they have it thick in the back. Every single person that I've met has never explained to me in an actual good explanation as to why they use it. They have all told me it simply feels better. When we create a brace, we are not necessarily pushing out the back. We're not necessarily pushing out the front. We're actually trying to push globally. And if I have something that is saying, okay, you're gonna push globally, but you're only gonna get a little bit of help here and you're gonna get most of the help here, that is a great way to attract a lot of tension, because belts hold tension in an area. This is a great way to put a lot of tension in your back because the material is gonna stabilize you here. That means it's gonna attract attention here and it's gonna take away attention from the front. So you're gonna get a stabilization situation that has you stabilizing out the back and not globally. Other thing too is a lot of people don't really get the chance to try this, believe it or not. Maybe more people could actually benefit from this. I've actually seen some people pull quite a bit in tapered belts. Now that we understand these concepts and we understand rigid versus flimsy versus lever versus prong, now we can probably actually put them in order as to most rigid gets tight the fastest to least rigid and then just flexes. Like it'll just flex for you forever. And that would probably occur like this. So the Inzer is extremely rigid. Like I have it literally sitting on this bar and it's flopping this way instead of it's not even bending around the bar. It's a rock. It's just completely just a rock. Next up, probably 10 millimeter Longhorn, because the 10 millimeter Longhorn is also, although 10 millimeter and thin, it is very rigid. It does not give in a width sense or in a length sense. It is hard. You will lever in on it and you will feel like you are pushing against a wall. Albeit the wall will feel less thick than this, but it will still be a very thin wall type of feeling. Then next up, SBD belt, of course. SBD, like I said, you're getting kind of the middle ground of extremely like rigid and just really floppy. We've seen belts that are quite literally feel like they're a rock. So SBD probably occurs in the middle. Great balance of levering, still can brace some. Not necessarily in the middle as to, someone that might need more space. This might not actually work. Just mentioning that right now. Next up, probably your double prong, because then you get rigidity in a width sense, and then you have still some give where you're gonna get kind of the best of both worlds, but more in a flexible sense. And then you're gonna get what a lot of people like to deadlift in, Titan Toro. Really flexible, really flimsy. It really only starts to stop after you're fully in on it. So of course people like to deadlift on it because it really lets them get fully out of space, fully into the bar before it leaves the ground. Some people like squatting in it too, because of the fact that it almost feels beltless in a sense, but it gives you that tension right in the hole. So you don't feel much of anything until you get right into the hole, and then it finally gets maximally tight. You're like, okay, there's some help there. But you get maximum positional benefits from the Toro. So that's why it's become pretty popular. More than anything, just some lifters started using it and people started copying it, but there are reasons for it. On the vast end of the spectrum, obviously, next to beltless, just being completely beltless, this one and this one almost completely beltless, but once you get the millimeters down to about 6, it really doesn't get much thinner unless you go Velcro. This is something that, if I wasn't actually picking something up or trying to lift heavy, if I just wanted to do some arms and just feel like I could sit my back on it, while standing still, like I'd probably use it, but, or just for the meme really. Taper belts do have some merit with some people, but this particular 6 millimeter belt, arguably probably better to pull beltless. All right, rigid is soft, cool.